Emeka was a wealthy businessman, successful and admired by many. His life seemed perfect from the outside: luxury, power, and respect. But despite his success, there was something missing. A year ago, he had been engaged to Amara, a beautiful woman who had everything he thought he wanted, yet their relationship had crumbled under the weight of his ambition and neglect. Now, as he received Amara's wedding invitation, he felt a strange tug in his heart. He thought he had moved on, but the past always had a way of resurfacing. After much deliberation, he decided to attend the wedding, not alone, but with someone who would make a statement. He wasn't going to be the man who let his past control him anymore. His choice was Ada, a homeless woman he had met during one of his charity outings. She had nothing, no home, no family, no past, but there was a quiet dignity about her that intrigued him. She didn't ask for help, but she accepted it. Over time, Emeka had offered her shelter and guidance, though Ada rarely spoke about her past. On the day of the wedding, Emeka arrived at the venue with Ada by his side. As they entered the grand hall, the guests, dressed in their finest, turned their heads in surprise. Ada, wearing a simple blue dress, looked like a fish out of water among the elegantly dressed guests. But Emeka didn't care. He wanted to show that he was moving forward, that his life was his own now. Amara noticed them immediately, her eyes widening in shock. She had never expected Emeka to come, let alone bring someone like Ada. The room buzzed with whispers. Who was this woman? Why was she here? But Emeka, standing tall in his tuxedo, showed no signs of hesitation. He had made his choice, and in that moment, Ada was more than just a companion, she was a symbol of his newfound freedom. The wedding proceeded, but the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was wondering why Ada was there and what her story was. Was she just a pawn in Emeka's statement of independence, or was there more to her than met the eye? The real shock came later, at the reception. Ada, who had been quietly observing, stood up and addressed the crowd. Her calm voice filled the room as she revealed a shocking truth that no one could have anticipated. The evening air was thick with tension, as though the grand ballroom itself was holding its breath. The glittering chandeliers above, the clinking of glasses, and the murmur of voices all blended into a backdrop of suspense. But through it all eyes were on Ada. Her calm presence in the midst of the extravagant wedding reception seemed to draw a magnetic pull. Ada had been silent since entering the hall, quietly observing everything, her eyes scanning the room with an intensity that no one could quite understand. She wasn't intimidated by the lavish setting or the judgmental stares. In fact, she appeared completely unfazed. But Emeka knew better. Something was stirring within her, something she hadn't yet revealed. As the evening wore on and the guests gathered around, mingling with small talk, Ada quietly excused herself from Emeka's side. She stood near the corner of the room, looking out at the elegant crowd, her gaze as calm as the sea before a storm. Emeka, feeling the weight of the moment, watched her closely, a sense of unease growing within him. He had no idea what she was planning. Then, without warning, Ada stood up straight, her voice breaking the low hum of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice surprisingly clear and steady, "there is something I must tell you all." The chatter died down immediately. All eyes turned toward her, some confused, others curious. Emeka's heart raced. What was she about to say? A few guests exchanged puzzled glances, but no one dared interrupt her. "I know many of you are wondering why I'm here," Ada continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "But what you don't know is that my past is tied to someone in this room, someone who you may think you know, but don't truly understand." A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Amara, standing with her new husband at the front, looked like she had just been struck by a bolt of lightning. Her eyes narrowed, her hands gripping the edge of her wedding dress, clearly uncomfortable. Emeka's breath hitched, and he glanced nervously at Ada. What was she doing? She had always been mysterious, but this? This was something else. He didn't know where this was going, but he had a sinking feeling that the night was about to take a turn he couldn't predict. Ada continued, her voice growing more resolute. I am not just a homeless woman. I was once part of this very family. I was once Amara's sister. A collective gasp echoed through the room, and the faces of the guests turned to shock. Amara's face drained of color. Her eyes flickered between Ada and Emeka, her breath catching in her throat. The room fell into an eerie silence, only the sound of the soft music in the background cutting through the tension. You see, Ada continued, her voice unwavering, I was adopted into the family many years ago, long before Amara and Emeka were even engaged. But something terrible happened. A tragedy tore us apart, and I was cast out. No one knew what happened to me, but I ended up on the streets. I became someone they could forget. But I never forgot who I was, or who I had been to them. Emeka's mind spun. He had no idea. This was a secret he never could have anticipated. How could Ada have been part of Amara's family? Why had she never told him? The questions raced through his mind, but he remained silent, watching Ada closely. Amara, now visibly trembling, stepped forward. This is a lie, she said, her voice tight with panic. You can't be serious. I don't know who you are or what you're trying to do, but this is. It's true, Ada interrupted, her voice firm. I'm the sister you erased from your life, the one you decided was no longer worth your time or effort. You and your parents turned your backs on me, and I was left to fend for myself. The silence was deafening. The room was now filled with murmurs, as the guests tried to process what Ada had just revealed. No one knew what to say or how to react. The carefully curated world of perfection that Amara and her family had built around themselves began to unravel. Emeka, still standing at the edge of the room, felt a strange mix of emotions. Shock, confusion, guilt. He had unknowingly been a part of this lie, standing by while Ada had suffered alone on the streets. But more than that, he felt a sense of betrayal. Amara had never told him about Ada, had never mentioned this chapter of her life. Why? Amara's expression was one of utter disbelief. Why didn't you come back, she demanded, her voice wavering. Why didn't you tell me where you were? I tried, Ada replied quietly. But you were too busy with your perfect life, your perfect fiancé, to even notice that I was gone. I was nothing more than a forgotten shadow in your world. The guests continued to watch, some with pity in their eyes, others with judgment. Amara looked as though the ground had been pulled out from under her. She was no longer the pristine bride in the white gown, now, she was just another woman, exposed and vulnerable. Emeka, now understanding the full extent of Ada's past, felt an overwhelming need to protect her. This wasn't just a statement, this was a reckoning, a confrontation that had been a long time coming. You've been living with this secret all this time, he asked Ada quietly, his voice filled with disbelief. Why didn't you tell me? I never wanted anyone to pity me, Ada said softly, her eyes locking with his. And I never wanted to burden anyone with my past. But now, the truth was out, and nothing could ever be the same. Ada's revelation had shaken everyone in that room, and it was clear that the night would never be forgotten. But there was one question that lingered in the air, unanswered. The silence in the room stretched on like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. Ada's words still echoed in Emeka's ears, a truth that had been hidden for far too long. No one moved, no one dared to break the silence that had enveloped the reception hall. All eyes were on Ada, and then, reluctantly, they turned to Amara, whose face was now a mixture of anger, shame, and disbelief. Emeka watched as Amara took a step back, her wedding gown swirling around her like a cloud of confusion. The delicate music that had once played in the background now seemed out of place, too joyful for such a heavy moment. The guests had begun to murmur, some trying to make sense of what had just happened, others simply waiting for someone to speak. I can't believe this, Amara whispered, her voice trembling. You're lying. You're just trying to ruin my wedding, my life. Ada stepped forward, her calm demeanor now matched by a quiet resolve. I don't need to ruin your life, Amara. You've done that all on your own. She looked around the room, her eyes briefly meeting those of the guests. The truth is, I'm not here to destroy anything. I'm here to finally be seen. To be heard. Emeka could feel the heat of the moment building. This wasn't just about a secret revealed, this was about the lives of two women, Amara and Ada, that had been torn apart by lies, neglect, and choices made by people who should have cared. He found himself in the middle, a man who had once been in love with Amara, now caught in the aftermath of her past. But Ada's words were like a fire burning through the fog of confusion. You have everything, Amara. The perfect family, the perfect life, the perfect wedding. But you've never had to face the consequences of your actions. You didn't care that I was your sister, someone you promised to love. Instead, you left me to suffer, and I had to fight every single day to survive. I wasn't your shadow, I was someone you chose to forget. The room had shifted from shock to something far more uncomfortable. Emeka glanced at the guests, many of whom now looked at Amara with pity. He couldn't help but feel a wave of anger at her for never telling him this, for never letting him in on the truth. He had loved her, and yet, all along, she had kept him in the dark about the most important part of her past. Amara, still shaken, looked down at the floor. You don't understand, she said, her voice barely audible. I was young, and I didn't know what to do. My parents told me you were lost. They said I had to move on. I thought you were gone forever. Ada's eyes flashed with something sharp, something Emeka had never seen before. That's the lie you told yourself. But the truth is, you didn't want to look for me. You wanted to move on, to have the perfect life. And in doing so, you let me go. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Guests exchanged looks, some shifting uncomfortably, others trying to come to terms with the unfolding drama. Emeka had never been more uncertain of his own emotions. He had known that Amara and her family had their issues, but this? This was more than he could have ever imagined. He had been so wrapped up in his own world that he had never questioned Amara's past, never thought to dig deeper into the things she had hidden. But now, he couldn't ignore it. Ada had exposed everything, and Emeka felt a shift in his own heart. He wasn't just defending Ada out of some misplaced sense of duty, he was defending the truth. He was defending someone who had been cast aside by those who should have loved her the most. Amara stood there, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her own guilt. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice broken. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't know what to do. I couldn't bring myself to face the truth. Ada's response was simple, but it cut deep. I don't want your apology. I want you to understand what you did. I want you to see me for who I am now, not the girl you abandoned, but the woman who survived without you. There was a long pause as Amara tried to hold back tears. Emeka felt an odd mix of compassion and frustration for her. This wasn't just about a family secret, it was about the deep emotional scars that had been left unhealed for years. And now, everyone in the room could see those scars laid bare. But it wasn't just about Amara anymore. The revelation had shaken everyone present, and whispers rippled through the crowd. Emeka looked around and saw that some of the guests were starting to leave, their own discomfort too much to bear. But there was still one thing that needed to be addressed. Emeka finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. Amara, I came here tonight because I thought I had moved on. But now, I realize that maybe neither of us has truly moved on from our past. It's time to face the consequences of our actions, and for me, that means accepting that the person I thought I knew isn't the person I thought you were. Amara opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. She was choking on the truth that had just been thrust into the light. As Emeka turned to Ada, he could see the weariness in her eyes. She had carried this burden for so long, and now, it was out in the open. She wasn't just a homeless woman anymore. She was a woman who had been wronged, who had fought through unimaginable hardships and had come out stronger on the other side. Emeka took a deep breath, knowing that this was a turning point for him too. There was no going back now. The pieces had fallen into place, and everything had changed. The guests had slowly begun to leave, murmuring to each other in low voices. But Emeka knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far bigger than any wedding celebration. The night stretched on, but the atmosphere had shifted. Gone was the elegance of the wedding reception, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that hung over the venue like a heavy fog. The opulent ballroom, once alive with laughter and celebration, now felt like a courtroom, everyone on edge, watching and waiting. Emeka stood with Ada, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. He had come to the wedding thinking it would be a simple step into his past, but now, it was as though he had stepped into a storm of truths he wasn't prepared for. Amara had retreated to a private corner of the room, her face hidden behind her hands as she tried to compose herself. Her new husband, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, stood beside her, looking at Ada and Emeka with a mixture of confusion and disapproval. The guests, who had initially been captivated by the drama, had begun to filter out, some leaving quietly, others in hushed conversations about what they had just witnessed. Emeka glanced at Ada, who remained as composed as ever, her eyes fixed on the exit, as though her past had followed her into this room and now demanded to be addressed. "You did well," Emeka said quietly, breaking the silence between them. Ada looked at him, her expression soft but firm. "I didn't do it for you, Emeka. I didn't do it for anyone but myself. I've spent too long hiding in the shadows, pretending that none of this matters. But it does. It matters, and it always has." Emeka nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He could see now that this wasn't just about exposing a family secret, it was about Ada reclaiming her dignity, her voice, after years of being ignored, forgotten, and discarded. She had taken back control of her narrative, and no one could take that away from her. The night had become something entirely different now, a reckoning not just for Amara, but for everyone in the room. The things left unsaid had finally come to the surface, and the consequences of long-buried truths had begun to unravel. Emeka couldn't ignore the feeling of guilt that gnawed at him. For all the times he had been so focused on his business, on his wealth, on his future, he had failed to notice the people who truly mattered. He had failed to see Ada for who she was, not just the woman who had been abandoned, but the woman who had fought for everything she had. Turning back toward the reception, Emeka saw Amara still huddled with her new husband. The new man in her life, who had once been a stranger to Emeka, now appeared uncomfortable, shifting from one foot to the other. His eyes flicked from Ada to Amara, unsure of how to react. Amara looked up, her face streaked with tears. She wiped them away quickly, as though the action could erase the shame that had settled deep within her. Her eyes met Emeka's, and for a brief moment, there was something in them, something raw, vulnerable. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was clear that the woman who had once been so confident, so in control, had been shattered by the truth. Emeka felt a pang of pity for her, but it was quickly replaced by something else, a recognition of the consequences of the past. Ada had been the one who had borne the burden of their shared history, while Amara had continued to live in the carefully constructed world she had created. Now, that world was crumbling, and it was unclear whether it could ever be rebuilt. "Amara," Emeka began softly, stepping toward her, "we need to talk." Amara nodded silently, her face pale, her expression blank as she watched him approach. She looked fragile, as though she were on the brink of something breaking. Emeka glanced back at Ada, who stood near the entrance, waiting for him. She had been through enough tonight, and he knew she wasn't the one who needed to speak any longer. This was Amara's moment, her chance to face the reality of what she had done, to finally confront the consequences of a life built on secrets. "What happened to us, Amara?" Emeka asked, his voice a mixture of frustration and sadness. "How did we get here? How did you get to the point where you could forget your own sister? Where you could walk away from everything?" Amara opened her mouth but hesitated, her gaze flickering to the floor. The weight of his question seemed too much for her to answer. I didn't forget her," Amara whispered, barely audible. "I thought I was doing what was best. I was trying to protect my future. I was trying to protect myself." Emeka's eyes narrowed, his anger flaring. "Protect yourself? By abandoning your sister? By pretending she didn't exist?" Amara flinched as if his words physically hurt, and for a brief moment, Emeka wondered if she was finally understanding the magnitude of her actions. He had never been able to understand her need to bury the past, but now, in the face of the truth, he realized how much she had feared confronting it. "I didn't want to lose everything," Amara said, her voice trembling. "I thought if I ignored it, if I pretended everything was fine, maybe it would go away. Maybe it wouldn't hurt so much." Emeka looked at her, his expression hardening. "But it never went away, did it? And now, it's all out in the open. The truth always finds its way out, Amara." Amara's eyes filled with tears again, but this time, there was no hiding from the truth. Emeka realized, in that moment, that Amara wasn't the person he had thought she was. She had been living in a facade, hiding from her own guilt, from the pain she had caused, not just to Ada, but to herself. "You've hurt her more than you realize," Emeka continued, his voice cold. "And now, you have to face the consequences of that." Amara's sobs filled the room as she sank to her knees, overcome by the weight of it all. Her new husband, who had stood by helplessly until now, knelt beside her, offering what little comfort he could. Emeka turned away from them, walking toward Ada, who had been watching from a distance, her face unreadable. He reached her and stood quietly for a moment before speaking. "I don't know what happens next," Emeka said softly. "But I think I understand now." Ada nodded, her eyes clear, but her heart heavy. "The past is never truly gone, Emeka. It's always there, waiting to be dealt with." Together, they stepped out into the cool night, the storm inside the wedding hall still raging, but they had faced what needed to be faced. And the consequences, whatever they might be, were theirs to live with now. The cool night air enveloped Emeka and Ada as they walked away from the grand hall, the sounds of sobs and whispered conversations fading behind them. The truth had been exposed, the secrets that had bound them all unraveling one by one. Now, outside the chaos of the wedding reception, the world seemed quieter, almost surreal. The weight of what had happened still hung in the air, but there was a strange sense of finality, as if a long-buried wound had finally been opened and could now begin to heal. Emeka glanced at Ada as they walked along the quiet street, the dim streetlights casting long shadows on the ground. She seemed calm, almost detached, but he could see the weariness in her eyes, the exhaustion of a woman who had fought to survive, to be seen, and to reclaim the truth she had been forced to bury for so long. "You were incredible tonight," Emeka said quietly, his voice sincere. "I don't know how you did it." Ada looked at him, her gaze steady. "I didn't do it for praise, Emeka. I did it for me. I've spent so many years pretending to be invisible, hiding from my past, from who I really am. Tonight, I stopped hiding. And that's the first time I've truly felt free." Emeka nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had spent his life running toward success, building an empire, seeking approval from those who mattered in the business world, but in that moment, he realized how hollow it all felt compared to the raw, unfiltered truth that Ada had just shared. She had no need for validation from others, her strength came from within, from the acceptance of who she was, despite everything life had thrown her way. As they continued walking, Emeka felt a sense of closure. He had always thought that moving on from his past with Amara was the right decision, but now he saw that it wasn't about running away. It was about confronting the past, facing the people who had been part of it, and acknowledging the pain that had come from it. Ada had done that with unwavering courage, and now, it was Emeka's turn to do the same. "I never knew," Emeka said, his voice tinged with regret. "I never knew what you went through, Ada. I knew you were strong, but I didn't realize how deep the scars were. I should have asked more, cared more." Ada stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression softening. "You're not the one who should carry the blame, Emeka. You've done what you could, and it wasn't your fault. It's Amara's burden to carry, not yours." Emeka's gaze shifted to the ground. "But I could have known. I could have asked. Instead, I was too wrapped up in my own world, in my own plans. I should have seen what was right in front of me." Ada placed a gentle hand on his arm. "We all make mistakes, Emeka. But the important thing is what we do afterward. You didn't know then, but you understand now. And that's all we can ask for, growth." Emeka met her gaze, and for the first time, he understood the depth of what she was saying. Growth wasn't just about business success or wealth, it was about evolving as a person, facing the hard truths, and doing better when you knew better. As they reached the car, Emeka paused and looked back toward the wedding hall, the lights now dimming as the last of the guests trickled out. He thought of Amara, still inside, still grappling with the weight of her past and the future that seemed so uncertain now. He wondered if she would ever be able to truly heal, or if the secrets she had buried for so long would always haunt her. "I don't know what's going to happen with Amara," Emeka said, his voice thoughtful. "But I know one thing for sure, I don't want to be part of her story anymore. I've moved on from that life, from the lies." Ada nodded, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. "It's time for both of us to move on, Emeka. The past doesn't define us. What we do with the future is what matters." Emeka opened the car door and gestured for Ada to get in. "You're right. The past doesn't define us." As they drove away from the wedding hall, Emeka realized that the real journey had only just begun. He had once been defined by his success, his relationships, and the world he had built around him. But now, he understood that true freedom came not from wealth or status, but from facing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, and moving forward with integrity. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Emeka felt ready to face it. The following days were a blur of emotions for both Ada and Emeka. Word had spread quickly about Ada's revelation, and while some were sympathetic, others looked at her with judgment. But Ada had long since stopped caring about what others thought. For the first time in years, she was free. The weight that had once held her captive, the shame, the rejection, had been lifted. As for Amara, Emeka couldn't say what would become of her. She had tried to reach out to him, to apologize, but Emeka had made it clear that there was no going back. The woman she had been, the woman who had abandoned her sister, no longer existed in his eyes. There was no space for her in his life, not anymore. For Ada, the next chapter was uncertain, but she had a new sense of purpose. With Emeka's support, she began to rebuild her life, finding stability and peace in a world that had once been so cruel. She wasn't defined by her past anymore, but by the strength she had found within herself to move forward. And as for Emeka, he realized that life wasn't about perfection or achieving success at any cost. It was about learning from the past, embracing the lessons it had taught him, and living with honesty and humility. The woman who had once been a forgotten shadow in his life had become his greatest teacher. The truth had set them all free. Thank you for watching. What a ride! From shocking revelations to the raw emotions that unfolded, this story proves that sometimes the past is never truly gone, it always finds a way to resurface. Emeka, Ada, and Amara each had to face their own truths, and in the end, it was about more than just a wedding, it was about reclaiming what was lost, finding redemption, and learning from the mistakes of the past. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think will happen next for Emeka and Ada? How do you feel about Amara's decisions? We love hearing your opinions. Until next time, stay tuned for more drama, suspense, and powerful stories. Thanks for being part of this journey with us.